Good morning, friends. I hope you're having a good day, and I hope you're enjoying our study of Second Thessalonians. I know that I am. This is episode 2 in our study, and today we want to look at just 3 verses. Chapter 1, verses 5, 6, and 7. In chapter 1, Paul wants to encourage these Thessalonian Christians. They are being persecuted. They are suffering adversity for their faith. I'm not sure that we can relate too well, at least most of us, can relate too well to what is going on in Thessalonica. I know these words will have value, even for us, but I'm not sure they will have as much value and encouragement for us as they most likely did for the Thessalonian Christians in the first century. Because, we all have adversity and trouble in our lives, but I'm not being persecuted for my faith right now, and I couldn't in no way say that my situation is comparable to the Thessalonians to whom Paul writes. Still, I think we can get value from these words. What Paul wants to do in verses 5 through 10 in this chapter is talk about the righteous judgment of God. He thinks that a reminder of God's justice and God's righteousness will encourage these Christians to stay the course, to remain steadfast in their love of the Lord and in their faith in Him. So he says in verse 5, this is evidence of the righteous judgment of God. Now, what does this refer to? I think it probably refers to something in verse 4, where Paul is talking about their patient endurance in adversity. This, he says, your patient endurance during hard times, this is evidence of God's righteous judgment. He wants to remind them of the certainty of God's plan in these verses. He knows that if they can remember God's plan and how they fit into His plan, they're going to be encouraged even during suffering and persecution. Well, what is our hope? Verse 5, that God is working out His purpose in us. Doesn't that encourage you? To believe that God is working out His purpose in you? Interesting here, in verse 5, Paul seems to say that suffering has a redemptive purpose. Persecution even can be used to make us worthy of the kingdom of God. Now that is a deep thought. That certainly is a good way to look at persecution and a good way to look at suffering, that God is using these things and these circumstances to shape us for His eternal kingdom. I'd rather that He didn't have to use suffering in my life to shape me for His reign and His dominion. But Paul says if you're suffering, if you're dealing with adversity, God is just making you worthy for His reign and for His kingdom. What is the Christian's hope in verse 6? That God will repay with affliction those who afflict us. Now honestly, I don't know right now if I care if God repays those who afflict us. I don't know. I guess I might reach the point where I saw so much pain delivered by others that I would want God to act in vengeance upon those who hurt His children. But Paul says that's part of our hope, is that one day God will set things right and that those who are evil will be punished and those who afflict us will be repaid for their evil deeds. And then in the next verse, Paul says our hope is that God will grant rest and relief to those who are being afflicted. When? At the revelation of Jesus with His mighty angels at the last day. This is a reference to the second coming of Christ. And Paul says no matter what's going on now, you can have this assurance that the day is coming when God will give rest to His people. And He will relieve them of their suffering. Now that's a good thought, isn't it? How do these words affect you? How do these thoughts from these verses affect you? Which thoughts here did you find to be meaningful? Was it that God's justice will eventually win the day? I'd like to see God's justice win the day today. I'd like to see His justice prevail even now. But it is encouraging that even if people are not treated fairly now and God's justice does not seem to prevail now, at the last day it will prevail. Or were you encouraged by the thought that God is using everything that happens in your life to make you worthy of His kingdom? Even suffering, even adversity, even distress, even trouble. Lord, whatever your plan and purpose is for our lives, work it out. And use whatever happens to your honor and glory. That is our prayer. I hope you're encouraged by the reading and meditation on these verses. God bless you as we continue on through 2 Thessalonians.